good afternoon. Like Katie said, thank you so much for sticking with us throughout this. I hope you've all enjoyed the discussions that we've had so far and the conversations in the different concurrent sessions. And so also thank you for sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. Like Katie introduced, my name is Rahma Siad-Togane, and I'm a research assistant with YouthREX, also a PhD candidate with the School of Social Work. And I'll be presenting today with Kamau.
Hi, I'm Kamau. I'm a Learn and Research Associate with YouthREX, and I work with the Learn by YouthREX team primarily on delivering workshops and webinars.
Great. So our presentation today is entitled, What Makes a Good Life? Perspectives from Black Youth in Ontario. And so we really wanted to close the teach-in by sharing for the first time some of the data and findings that's emerging from a project entitled the Ontario Youth Sector Compass Project. So this is sort of a rough outline that will structure the conversation that we're hoping to have today. So we want to introduce a bit more about the project, what were our overarching objectives, and some of the methodology that we used. And from there, we want to share some of the emerging findings, which are grouped into 4 major themes at this point. And then to end off on what are our reflections so far from the data that's coming in particular from the open-ended questions of this survey, and what does this mean, and what are some implications of these findings for youth work? And so to share a bit more information about the Ontario Youth Compass Research Project. So it's a research project with YouthREX in collaboration with the York Research Chair in Youth and Context of Inequity, Dr. Uzo Anucha. And the project is focused on understanding what supports do young people in Ontario need to thrive, and what are the supports that youth workers need in order to adequately support young people in the most healthy way possible. We take an equity-based approach in understanding the experiences of both youth and youth workers, and we do this by merging both the quantitative data with stories from qualitative interviews to provide us a rich and robust understanding and insights about different groups across the province of both youth and youth workers.
Hi, so I'm just going to go over some of our research objectives and hopes for this project. We wanted to really address what issues youth in Ontario were experiencing or are experiencing. What are the issues, gaps, and barriers encountered by youth workers? How are youth workers responding to the challenges they're experiencing? How might we leverage and engage systems to better support youth and youth workers? And ultimately, what do youth want and need to have a good life in Ontario? So this was our methodology for this project. There was an online survey completed, and the final sample analysis was 3,343 youth and 356 youth workers. 249 out of the 3,343 youth identified as being Black. And there were also one-on-one in-depth interviews conducted for 81 youth and 73 youth workers. So today our presentation is really going to focus on the 249 Black youth who completed the online survey, including a thematic coding of their open-ended responses. So we're going to look at the different demographics for the Black youth participants. The N represents the number of participants. The N equals the 249, the total number. And for each area is the number for each area, and the percentage underneath is the percentage for the total number. So 183 of the youth identified as Black were from Central Ontario, and that was followed by Eastern Ontario with 15%, and Southwestern Ontario with 9%, and Northern Ontario with 2%. So the majority came from Central Ontario, which is really normal based on the demographics of our province. And now we're going to look at the demographics based on age. So most of the participants were, most of the Black youth participants were over the age of 18, so out of high school age. 57% were between the ages of 18 to 24, and 31% between the ages of 25 to 29, with 16 to 17 years old being 12%. And we also asked Black youth to identify their gender. This number will add up to more than 100 because they were able to identify multiple genders. So you can take a look at that if you like, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
So as I mentioned earlier, we'll be sharing 4 main themes, and the structures are emerging findings thus far. And so those 4 main themes are, first of all, why does mental health matter for Black youth, right? And we want to begin the conversation around some of the quantitative data that came from the research of why we're having this discussion today to begin with, and what Black youth are telling us about their current mental health. So this question will share some of the ratings that Black youth who participated in this research have on their current mental health. Next, we'll jump to how do Black youth define what a good life is, as well as third, what are some barriers to having a good life? And lastly, we'll finish off with some changes that have been shared that need to happen at a provincial level for Black youth to be able to have a good life. So to begin, why does mental health matter for Black youth? So firstly, when we asked Black youth to rate their current mental health, we found that 1 out of 2 Black youth rated their current mental health as below average. So out of the 248 Black youth who responded to this question, 126 youth, or 50%, have a below average rating of mental health. So this is why this conversation that we're having today is so important, is that we can see our Black youth mental health is below average within the province of Ontario. Secondly, only 1 out of 4 Black youth felt that they were currently living a good life. However, more than half of Black youth felt that it was likely. So when we look at the likelihood of having a good life in the future and their outlook to the future, more than half do believe that they can attain a good life, although currently only 1 out of 4 believe that they currently have a good life. So there are opportunities there, and we wanted to share that as well. So our main finding here is that we can see that there is a significant relationship between current mental health ratings and the ratings about the belief in the likelihood of achieving a good life in the future. This means that when mental health ratings were higher and more positive, the beliefs of Black youth about their likelihood of achieving a good life were also higher.
So since we understand that achieving a good life is directly correlated or positively correlated to Black youth's mental health, we have to understand what a good life means to Black youth. So that's what we're going to go into next. So we asked youth to tell us how Ontario youth define a good life and the things that contribute to this. A good life might be considered the kind of life you dream of living and would include things you want for yourself, as well as things you would want to see in the broader community and world. So when defining a good life, Black youth participants outlined 3 main themes that we saw reoccur: mental health and self-awareness, love and relationship, and financial stability. When speaking to mental health, self-awareness, and aspirations, these were all connected to how Black youth felt like they had a desire for happiness and a worry-free lifestyle and building self-awareness and self-sufficiency. There are also sub-themes related to their access to healthcare or lack thereof, and mental health supports, especially mental health supports, which we'll go into more detail. But we're going to go through a few responses from Black youth participants and how they felt mental health really was directly tied to what it meant to live a good life. So participant 18 stated, having a good life to me means that I'm well-rounded and balancing my mental, emotional, and physical health, tending to my interpersonal and familiar relationships, and being at one with myself. Participant 2 stated, having a good life means a lot to me, being able to walk freely in the streets without being discriminated against or bullied. Also being able to maintain my mental health would mean the world to me. So that second one is really important because you see there that participant 2 made a distinction between his mental health and being able to walk freely in the streets without being discriminated against or bullied. But obviously those 2 things are directly tied and connect with one another. And you cannot maintain your mental health while also being afraid to walk freely in the street without being discriminated against or bullied. So oftentimes we have to understand that throughout this whole presentation, we're going to see connections to how your mental health is negatively affected and the systems at play that affect your mental health, because Black youth aren't innately worse off mentally or have worse mental health because they are Black. It's because of systems and systematic oppression they face that affect their mental health and their understanding of themselves and their understanding of the world around them. The second point is financial stability. So a lot of Black youth, when defining mental or defining what it meant for them to achieve a good life or what a good life was, identified the need for financial stability. And when they spoke to this, they spoke to affordability of basic needs, job satisfaction, income security, income that supports long-term goals, the importance of understanding that work we don't live to work, we work to live. So understanding that if you cannot work in a way that supports your own dreams, your own ambitions, then it's really difficult to see yourself achieving a good life and to be in a happy and well state of mind. So here's a few responses that speak to financial stability that Black youth really expressed. So the first, by participant 31, a good life to me is one where I can have my own place to call home, be able to pay my bills, be able to go with people I care about, and to be able to treat myself when I need to. Participant 6 spoke to a good life starts with a solid financial foundation. It means living debt-free and being able to not only cover all my expenses, but enjoy luxuries like vacations, massages, a house, and a car. A life where I'm able to have a career because I'm passionate and not just because of how much the salary is. A life where I can afford to take days off and have more control and flexibility with my work hours. I will spend more time with my family and doing things I enjoy than at work in its ideal situation. So it is really interesting there. You see, it means living debt-free and being able to not only cover all my expenses, but enjoy a luxury like vacation, massages, a house, and a car. It is amazing how those things are interpreted as luxuries because of the financial conditions that a lot of Black youth are facing, and how we have to understand that in order to live a good life, like I said before, we cannot live to work, we have to work to live. And this person is expressing that in this response very clearly and succinctly. And the next point is love and relationships. So it's very important that when we looked at all the data, that when Black youth were talking about love and relationships, that they were not only talking about intimate partner relationships, they're also talking about reciprocity within the support system, community building, family support, friend support, social connections, and understand how this will connect with mental health. Because imagine your life, imagine your mental health without friends, without social connection, without any support, without anybody to lean on, and how that affects you or would affect anybody. So Black youth definitely spoke to this, and we're gonna look at a few responses from them speaking to this. Participant 15 said, a happy place, a life where there isn't much mental health issues, a life where the ones you love are important to you as much as you are important to them, a life of comfort and independence, a life full of love. Really speaking to the need of reciprocity, being able to love somebody and understand that you are also loved. That does a lot for somebody's own understanding of their own self-worth, their own reassurance, understand that not only that they're wanted, that they're loved, that they're cared for, that they deserve these things, that they deserve a good life, that they deserve to be cared for. And participant 5 also spoke to this by saying, a good life means having friends, family members, and other people in the community value you no matter what, being able to do most of, if not all the things I strive to accomplish in my life, like traveling. Again, also relating to the socioeconomic factors in terms of being able to travel, but also being able to just have that family support no matter what, being able to know that you are cared for and that you are loved no matter what happens in your life is very important, and was expressed as being very important to these Black youth in this study when identifying what it means to experience a good life. And now we're going to speak on the barriers to a good life. So we understand what Black youth defined as a good life. Now we're going to understand what they feel like is preventing them from achieving that, or what could prevent them from achieving that.
So the third theme to come from the open-ended questions that we asked Black youth were how Black youth were talking about what barriers were to a good life. And there were 3 sub-themes within this theme. The first was mental health as a barrier to a good life. Secondly, Black youth spoke to structural and socioeconomic barriers that prevent or stand in the way of having a good life. And third, we saw that there were a lot of narratives and responses around personal barriers, a lot of self-blame and insecurities that Black youth were facing that they would name as being barriers to having a good life. So focusing on mental health state, or the current mental health, was seen as an inhibitor to the pursuit of a good life. And we see here, as we saw in defining what a good life is, that there's a relationship between socioeconomic status and mental health. So having difficulty, whether it be accessing mental health services or experiencing poor mental health because of stressors that are related to socioeconomic status. So here we have 2 different quotes, one about having a diagnosis and the second not being diagnosed. So participant 18 speaks to many different diagnoses, so depression and anxiety, But then also, and Kamau mentioned this also, that when we talk about mental health, or what we've noticed when Black youth talk about mental health, is that it's connected to various different aspects of their lived experience. So affordable rent and housing, poverty in terms of the wages that they're receiving, lack of good, meaningful jobs. Kamau spoke to earlier that youth described the situation of living to work as opposed to wanting to have a job, a meaningful job that compensates them adequately and affords them the ability to enjoy life, so quality of life. And then the quote continues: medical conditions, whether they're diagnosed or not diagnosed, complex traumas, different triggering family dynamics or personal stressors, feeling lonely. So a lot of different ways of descriptions of mental health or mental illness as a barrier. And the second quote that we're sharing here, we wanted to highlight a lack of a network to navigate different systems as well, connected to mental health issues.
And then we speak, or Black youth spoke of structural and socioeconomic barriers. So when they spoke to the socioeconomic barrier, they really spoke to barriers in terms of employment, lack of affordability, and access to the healthcare services that they need, financial insecurity as well. So we're going to look at a few quotes that really identify how Black youth felt like that was a barrier to them achieving a good life. Participant 14 stated, "It is hard to get access to employment opportunities that offer benefits and a living wage. As of right now, the minimum wage is not enough to make ends meet. There's a lot of pressure on me to be successful so I can take care of my family, which can have a negative impact on my mental health and overall productivity." So you see here the direct correlation between socioeconomic living or financial barriers to their own mental health well-being. You cannot be in a good mental health place while also being stressed about or worrying about being able to take care of yourself and your family without benefits, without a living wage. These things are all connected. Black youth are not worse off mentally because they are Black. It's not innate in their Blackness. It is based on the systems that affect them negatively by doubting themselves and doubting their environment and making them pessimistic to their opportunities in this world. And then they continue to say, as of right now, I am still trying to find out what truly brings me happiness and what I'm passionate about. And that is probably because you cannot find out what brings you happiness and is passionate if you are constantly worried about being successful enough to take care of your family. How can you explore different avenues, different environments to really understand your own passions, your own life ambitions and goals when all you are worried about or focused about, or have to be focused about, is making ends meet? And then another response by participant 35 is, "I feel like things were rigged for me from the beginning because I've been paying rent since I left high school. I went from high school to paying rent to risking it and getting in debt for college, and now I'm back to just paying rent. Not having support system means letting go of dreams I've had for basic survival. People support go places." So it speaks to a lack of support, and this speaks to a lot of actual systems and organizations that cater to youth because they are cut off very early. So that kind of speaks to the same thing that this you spoke about, because when you have to take care of yourself from 18, take care of all your expenses, take care of yourself, how can you possibly manage through college, manage through school, manage through life? I think, don't quote me on this, but there's a much greater percentage of likelihood of not finishing your post-secondary degree or diploma if you have to work a job. And this is shown here how this person feels like he was always at a disadvantage because of his lack of support and financial barriers to his possibly achieving a good life. And then we have insecurity, self-blame, and barriers to personal growth. So even though Black youth identified several factors that really impact and act as barriers to them achieving a good life, they still express feelings of worthlessness and perceived deficiencies and attributes and perceptions of having made the wrong choices that stand in the way. So this speaks to a lot to mental health and a lot to the other themes that came up. Even if you can understand that those things play a role in acting as a barrier to achieving a good life and preventing you from achieving that, it's still hard to not also internally blame yourself when you see other people achieving a good life around you, when you see that the dreams that you want are being achieved by other people. And here are a few responses really talking about that. So participant 9 stated, "Being negative minded, having no hope, no motivation, scared of making mistakes, not letting go of the past, comparing myself to others, taking things too personal, worrying about the future, scared of failing. And participant 7 stated, I don't have any confidence in myself or my abilities, and I'm hesitant to build strong relationships with others in fear of judgment. Participant 7's statement, that is not internal. That is based on your external experiences with the world. I don't have any confidence in myself or my abilities. That's a lack of support. That's a lack of confidence inducing reassurance. And I'm hesitant to build strong relationship with others in fear of judgment. These things are all impacting of one's mental health and one's image of themselves.
And also to that last point, if we also connected to some of the quantitative data, that outlook that Black youth have of of the future and what the future holds, how some these insecurities and self-blame also impact their outlook for the future. And so the fourth theme that we wanted to share is what Black youth identify as changes that are needed in the province to have a good life. And we have two major changes. The first one is, again, mental health services. And here youth are calling for more affordable, long-term and tailored to youth, and that mental health services that are tailored to youth, and also more awareness and education around mental health. So when youth talk about long-term, there are responses here that talk about aging out of particular services as well. And the second one is affordability and cost of living in Ontario. And this includes 4 sub-themes of housing, income and affordability, tuition and student debt, and childcare. And before we get into these, one of the threads that we're finding in when youth are asked to define a good life, they talk about financial stability. In the question around what are barriers, they point to structural barriers. And then now what needs to change, we have this huge section on affordability and the cost of living. So I want to make mention of these connections between what is positive mental health, what are standing in the way, and how often structural barriers, financial barriers, and affordability within our province are named by Black youth. So getting into mental health in particular, participant 3 states, in Ontario, mental health services are far and few in between. A person having a mental health crisis may have to wait hours to see a medical professional. And even when they do, their situation may not be taken as seriously as it should be. A lot of key actors in our communities, such as teachers, police officers, and guidance counselors, are not adequately trained to support youth dealing with mental health issues. And so one of our findings you'll find is that for Black youth mental health, relationships matter. And here, this participant is naming some of the key actors within their lives, within their community, or the structures that surround them, where they're not adequately trained to provide that support. Participant 21, affordable mental health services, easy to access mental health services with non-discriminatory healthcare. So even if it isn't affordable or well-trained, even being easy to access for youth, knowing where to go to access mental health services. And also participant 28, free therapy for teenagers, at least for the ones that live in low-income families. So oftentimes we think that particular communities might be hesitant or distrustful of mental health professionals, when oftentimes it's access, and when mental health is compounded with income or class, for an example, that these are additional barriers that Black youth need to navigate. And lastly, affordability and the cost of living in Ontario. The cost of living and income levels in Ontario, including housing, income and affordability, tuition and student debt, and childcare. These are stresses and challenges that come from the cost of living. So some participants called for a living wage, while others pointed to the need for a basic income guarantee. There was also the need to lower the cost of food, gas, education, and other living costs. So within affordability and the cost of living, housing was the most profound response that was coming from youth. Youth were talking about homelessness, the risk of homelessness, high rents, lack of accessible housing, and the need for different kinds of options, especially for low-income individuals or for students as well. And one thing I want to make mention too is that a lot of the issues that we're talking about provincially and not focusing just on youth in general. It was really interesting sometimes when we think of youth and the issues that youth are grappling with, it's really easy for us to compartmentalize their issues. But one thing that the research is telling us is that the issues that exist across the board for all Ontarians, youth are also experiencing these issues as well. So youth living with partners or with roommates, otherwise unhealthy living arrangements, but they can't escape these realities because of the housing crisis that we have within the province, but also youth that are looking at their future and wanting to have investments, wanting to generate wealth, but again, unable to do so because of our real estate market. And I wanted to make mention there so that when we're having these debates, that we're not excluding youth from also having these issues in addition to all of the issues that are specific to their age as well. And so here we have participants speaking to this theme, building more public housing, more subsidized social housing, connecting this to eco-friendly and renewable technology, more green space, less urban concrete metal jungles. More support, participant 12 speaks of affordable therapy, maybe grants, more access to affordable housing. And so here, again, Kamau and I both have mentioned that when youth are speaking about mental health, they're connecting this to other aspects. So here we see the mental health and housing. We can't separate mental health from any of these different systems or structures that youth are experiencing and living and working through. And so when they talk about mental health, they're connecting it to housing, they're connecting it to affordability, they're connecting it to their relationships and to the different structures and systems that they're navigating on their day-to-day lives. And so I wanted to keep this response from one youth completely intact. It illustrates what I just said, that youth begin to talk about housing, but then this youth is painting a picture of just all the different constraints that they're experiencing, whether it's financially or housing. I'll read it here. I won't do it justice by paraphrasing. So the question was asking, what are the changes needed in Ontario? And this youth responds, serious overhaul of the rent and housing market, rapid affordable housing developments, rapid social and subsidized housing developments, transition for CRB and CRB into universal basic income and a guaranteed livable income, more low barrier grants, bursaries, scholarships, student awards, and low interest loans, more paid job training programs for youth, including older youth in their late 20s and early 30s, universal pharmacare, including therapy and counseling as a part of public health care, universal vision care and dental care. So they list all of these things, and then they continue to say, these ideas might seem radical to some, but we will never pull a significant portion of the population out of destitution, desperation, despair, depression, and demoralizing darkness if they're struggling in poverty with a day-by-day, paycheck-to-paycheck survivalist mindset. And no matter how Kamau and I try to illustrate how youth were creating this understanding of this living to work, I feel like this quote shares it so eloquently. And I'll continue. Many people feel stuck and trapped in their circumstances due to financial constraints that act as a major barrier to them achieving higher levels of fulfillment and self-actualization. So again, that outlook to the future, their current mental health is low, and the outlook to the future as well, depending on looking at this situation, there's a bit of that, it impacts their mental health. And so to finish, there's a lot of untapped potential and human capital for larger economic growth, including hindered or untapped talent and entrepreneurial potential because people's dreams have been crushed by trauma, poverty, or both. And for me, altogether, this means that when we have youth that are struggling and our Black youth that are struggling, there's a price that we're paying within the provinces where there are far-reaching implications for us when so many of our youth are living this way. So now, what are the implications of this work for youth work in particular?
So we found for the implications for Black youth that relationships really matter. Support systems are very important. Understanding they have somebody there for them, have somebody to support them along their journey of life is very important. Mentorship opportunities, support, guidance, navigating systems, very important things in terms of Black youth and what they need in terms of achieving the possibility of a good life. The structural barriers and self-blame slash confidence also a real inhibitor. They named and cited structural barriers, socioeconomic barriers, and yet they still assumed a lot of personal blame for their own, for their inability to achieve what they perceive to be a good life, creating feelings of insecurity and lack of confidence. As Rahma stated with that last response, the person also stated a dark, demoralizing life as a consequence. And that is very apparent when we talk about the structural barriers and their effect on Black youth's mental health. And then we look at the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. And so for future work, what could be done here? So I think for us, for me, critically, one of the connections I see here is that youth are so critical to name the structural barriers, the financial constraints. But what's happening here is that there's an internalization and a blame that's happening, that this is a result of some sort of a deficiency or lack on their part. And so we have this visual that came actually from all of the responses from our third theme of what barriers exist for Black youth in Ontario. And as you could see, the word that comes here is that there's a lack. There's some sort of lacking. And so what we're hoping could be future work is supporting Black youth in unpacking intersecting oppressions to alleviate some of the self-blame and some of these insecurities. Because in one hand, they're able to cite the structural barriers and the systemic issues that exist, but there needs to be some support to now alleviate some of that self-blame and those insecurities. And part of that work could be fostering critical understandings, but also creating opportunities and future research to kind of challenge within these different systems how Black youth are experiencing and walking through the world within these different institutions. We want to be mindful of time and give lots of opportunity for engagement. So thank you so much. And I just want to make mention, we're very early in some of these findings coming in and hope to have more opportunities to share some of this work, and definitely needing to continue some of the research to see what are the relationships between mental health and confidence, for an example, mental health and outlook for being able to achieve mental health in the future. So we need to do a bit more work as well, but we're excited to hear your feedback and some questions.